Hi, so just wanted to do a quick walkthrough for an API call and setting that data from the API call into a grid or a repeating list. Basically setting whatever data you want in the form of a JSON, but it could be from other forms of data as well. But what I'm expecting back from most API calls is a JSON, and I want to be able to set that JSON into a variable and set that variable into the grid and into the grid row elements. So let's get started. Let's take a look. I have two basic pages here. This is just a header, a button, and a grid or repeating list, and then a row card for this repeating list. Inside of this page, I have nothing going on page load, nothing going on page binding other than the default. On the row, same, page load just holds page binding runs v2, that's it. So that's all there is here for the two pages. Super simple setup. You see this button and the heading. So what I'm going to use is the SWAPI APIs, these Star Wars APIs. It's one of my favorite APIs because it's completely wide open to the public and you don't have to have any keys or anything to use it. So it's a good test bed to try to test how to use APIs, as well as how to parse JSON data, as well as getting specific things back from API calls and things like that. So it's a great little playground. So if I go back in here, the only thing that's actually doing anything here is this button. And this button runs a thing called Star Wars, which is my flow for the API call, setting the element value, and running the bindings afterwards to refresh the grid or the repeating list. So the API call is pretty simple, as you saw in SWAPI. It's basically just this endpoint address, and then after the slash, you can do people, you can do planets, you can do starships. I'm just going to do people to keep it simple. And if you do a 1 afterwards, that's only going to grab the first person or one person. I think it's one person. Anyway, so swapi.dev/API/people. So that's what we want to use. So that's what I have here, /people. You'll see that I have the method set to get, which is required. And then in the headers, it's just standard. I left it alone, content type, application JSON. That's always there by default. If you need to do any kind of thing with, say, an authorization, you can always add a secondary header, and usually it goes something like authorization, and then the header value will be bearer, and then your secret. So what I tend to do generally is I do a concatenate, and then I'll do bearer space most of the time, and then I'll just add my secret here, wherever it happens to be. Secrets. And then you can just select your secret or whatever you want to use. But for this particular instance, we do not need that. So I'll get rid of that authorization. Just know that if you need to use an authorization with a authorization token for an API, that's what you'll need to generally do there. And it should be straightforward. Of course, every API is different. So just read the documentation and understand where these things kind of go. These are headers. But we don't need to change the headers. We'll just leave content type application JSON. Where do I want to set the response? So I could set it directly into an element. I could set it directly into this repeating list, but I don't want to do it for the purpose of this example. There's also custom paths, which I haven't played with, but I'm going to set it into a variable, and I'm going to set it into a variable called API response. I believe the default right now for this action is API_response. But I changed it just so it's a little bit more familiar. And then you can also set the status code for the response. So every response gets the code back. This code will tell you if it's a successful response or if it's a failed response. The little error code is usually like a 200 if it's successful. Maybe it's a 400, 401 if it's unsuccessful, or a 500 if you run into some kind of network errors in between. And then you can also set it to run a flow afterwards, but I'm just going to do these consecutively rather than running a separate flow. And then here's where you can set if you want to run it server side or if you want to run it client side from the browser. I think we could run it either way. Let me switch it actually to client side and see if it breaks anything. And then for testing purposes, you could also go in here and do a console directly after. Make sure you put a wait in between. And here's what the response is going to look like, since I already looked at it and I know what it looks like. But this is API response is the response. So if I take out this stuff right here, this extra stuff, sorry, take out this extra stuff here, and I just leave API response, we'll see that in a second. Actually, let me change this console log, and let's do it like this, just for the purposes. So SWAPI results, and then I'll add the variable, and we'll do API. So that's set. It'll show us hopefully a console log that says SWAPI results, and it'll show what the response is, what's being set into the base variable API response. Since I already have it set up, I'm going to set the grid list with the element value, and that element value is going to be API response. So it'll set everything that's in that response into the grid list. And then I'm going to run data bindings, of course, to refresh the page. The only other thing I have to do here to make this work is go to the text box that I have on my row, and I go to the data tab on there. And from here, I set a variable called name. Now, I'll show you how this works here in a second. Let me just go here and refresh this. And we'll see a bunch of stuff over here. And a bunch of errors and all kinds of other stuff. So I don't see my console log. That's something odd. So let me go over to the network tab, and I'll look and see where my HTTP call is. Oh, I didn't make the call yet. That's why I don't see it. All right, so let's just hit the button. We'll make our call. And as you see, we have a bunch of data in here, and this is the SWAPI results that we were looking for. If you do the console logs like that, it makes things a lot easier for you to be able to track things down. So if you do a concatenate rather than just console logging the variable, you can actually search for this result in your console log, and that will make it easier to find what you're looking for in the console log, especially if you've got a bunch of stuff in the console log. So that's just a quick tip. But you see we've got all that data back, and this is exactly what it looks like. This is the JSON output of that data. If you would take all this, take out the extra characters and put it into a JSON reader, you would see everything the way it is. The other place where you're going to see that is here. So the preview is, this is here's the first one actually. That one didn't load. Here's the preview, and then here's the results. And you'll see here exactly the way it is on the SWAPI API. If you look here, it looks pretty much the same, right? You've got name, Luke Skywalker, height, blah, 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 mass, blah, 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 and then all this other stuff underneath it. So this is what I was referring to when I say, here's the response data. I set that data into the grid list or the repeating list. And then for the actual row, I just took name because that's what I want. I want the name. I could get other things like height and mass and hair color. And let's just add those in just to see what it looks like. But essentially, that's what I'm doing. I set the data into the grid. And then once the data is set into the grid, then I can pull these specific things out by their names, right? So it already knows it has all this information. And if I set one individual grid row to name or height or mass, it'll pull that information out, right? Because it's already going row by row. So you see each one of the 10 responses that came back here, 0 through 9. You'll see all the names in the same order. Let's just add height and mass just for the sake of adding things. I'll do this and drop a div in here real quick so I can make sure that this doesn't look too crazy. I'll throw that in there, and we'll call this one name. And then we will duplicate and duplicate. We'll call this one, what was it, height? And we'll call this one mass. And same thing applies, the way we set the name data here from variable name. It sounds weird because we didn't actually set a variable name, but it knows that that data is available in the grid, and so it's able to pull it out just like a variable. So on this one we'll put height, and on this one we will put mass. And we'll go back and refresh. Probably don't have to refresh even, I could probably just hit the button again. We'll go ahead and run our API call, and now you see we've got Luke Skywalker 17277. So you can't really read that because it's all mashed together. Let's spread those out a little bit. We'll do some styling on here real quick, and we'll just do like a display flex and yep. 1 AM. What's going on? Oh. 1 PM. All right, cool. So we don't have spacers on there or anything, but let me see if I can hit that button again. If it'll change it. No. At least it spaces it out a little bit. So this is height and this is mass. And we don't know what those are in. It's probably centimeters and kilograms, I would imagine. That sounds about right. So it's very metric. But we could also add like hair color, right? We could add another text box and call it hair color. Hair underscore color, right? So we'll just grab that. And we'll stick that in here. And refresh. Let's try it with the button, see if it'll throw it in there. We don't have a way to clear it out. So when I hit this button, if I put I can do that. Let's go to this button, and then I'll probably have to refresh either way. But I'll just do, before the API call, I'll set elements. So I'll set the element data on the grid to nothing. And then I'll run the API call, and then I'll console log and do my thing. And that should, I might have to refresh. Yeah, because I changed. All right, so now you have blonde, none, brown, gray. It's missing an E. That's strange enough. Oh, blonde. Strange. But yeah, now you have, so you can just keep going and going and going and going with that, right? And it seems like it's stopping at just 10 people. There might just be 10 people total. I don't know for sure, but other APIs, you'll get back much more data, much more information. So that's generally it. I'm trying to keep it short as possible. I know I'm already way deep in the weeds here, but that's basically it. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, contact me, leave a message, or drop a Discord message or something like that. And have a nice evening. Thank you.